Okay, let's unpack this. You know when you see someone performing, maybe a musician or uh, an actor, and they're just completely in the zone?
Yeah, totally absorbed, like everything else just disappears.
Exactly. And you wonder, where does that power come from? Is it just like endless practice, skill?
Or is it something else? Something a bit more mysterious, maybe. That feeling of flow, it's always been fascinating.
It really has. And believe it or not, that exact question goes way back. Today, we're diving into a really famous conversation about it from Plato. It's called Ion.
Right, the dialogue between Socrates and this guy Ion, who was a rhapsode.
And a rhapsode, just so we're all on the same page, was kind of a rock star performer back then, right?
Oh.
Reciting epic poetry.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah.
Especially Homer. They weren't just reading lines, they were bringing these huge, ancient stories to life for audiences. A big deal.
So you brought us this source because you want to get into this classic philosophical take on, well, art and inspiration and what it even means to know something in that context.
That's the plan. Our mission here is to pull out the, let's say, the really juicy bits, the surprising insights from this chat between Socrates and Ion.
Okay, so setting the scene, Ion's just had a big win. First prize at a festival.
Yep, at Epidaurus. And he's heading to Athens, feeling pretty pleased with himself, planning to compete again there.
And Socrates bumps into him. And Socrates, being Socrates, starts the conversation, but maybe not how you'd expect. He sort of admires the rhapsode's life.
He does, yeah. He talks about how enviable it is, always looking sharp, hanging out with great poets, especially Homer, who he calls the best and most divine.
And he mentions needing to understand the poet's thought, not just memorize words. Seems like high praise.
It's almost like a bit of initial flattery, maybe, acknowledging the depth involved before he starts questioning it.
And Ion, he totally eats it up, right?
Yeah.
Especially coming off his win.
Oh, absolutely. He jumps right in, saying he's the best there is when it comes to Homer, better than anyone. He even names Metrodorus, Stesimbrotus, saying he leaves them in the dust.
So he's brimming with confidence about his Homeric expertise.
Definitely. He's certain he has this unique skill, specifically for Homer.
Okay, so Socrates hears this and starts to, gently probe. He asks, all right, if you're so amazing with Homer, does that same skill work for other poets, like Hesiod or the Puckus?
And this is where it gets interesting. Ion's answer is basically no.
Just no.
Pretty much. He says Homer is quite enough for him. Doesn't seem interested in the others.
And Socrates notices something about his actual reaction too, doesn't he?
Yeah, this is key. Socrates observes that when someone recites Homer, Ion lights up. He's alert, engaged, totally into it.
But with other poets,
He admits he gets drowsy, his mind wanders, he literally has nothing to say, even if those poets are talking about the same big themes: war, the gods, life, death.
which is weird, right? If you're an expert on, say, war poetry, shouldn't you
Yeah.
have something to say about all war poetry?
Exactly, and that's the core problem Socrates raises. How can you be a judge of what's good on a subject if you can't also recognize what's bad or, well, just different when someone else talks about the same thing?
He uses analogies I remember, like arithmetic.
Right. Someone who knows numbers can tell if anyone is talking sense about numbers, good or bad calculations. Same with the doctor judging talk about health or food.
The skill applies across the board to the whole subject.
That's the idea. If you truly possess an art, a techne, as the Greeks called it, like a systematic skill or knowledge, it should cover the whole field.
So it brings us back to Ion. If poetry is an art, like painting or sculpture,
Then someone who understands that art should be able to judge all painters or all sculptors, good ones, bad ones, the whole lot.
and he challenges Ion. Have you ever met a painting expert who could only judge, say, Polygnotus, but was clueless about every other painter?
And Ian has to say, well, no, he's never met anyone like that.
The implication being, if Ion can only judge Homer,
Then maybe what he has isn't really an art or comprehensive knowledge of poetry after all. Poetry itself seems to be treated as a whole, like these other arts.
okay, so if Ion's amazing ability with Homer isn't art, isn't skill in that Socratic sense, then what is it?
Socrates offers his alternative explanation. It's not techne, it's inspiration, a kind of divine power.
Ah, okay. This is where the famous magnet thing comes in, right?
Exactly. The magnet analogy, it's such a great image. Think of the muse, the source of inspiration, as the main magnet.
Okay.
This magnet pulls the poet towards it. The poet is like the first iron ring stuck to the magnet, filled with its power.
Got it. Poet, First ring.
Then hanging off that poet ring might be other poets influenced by the first. And then hanging off them, or maybe directly from the muse too, are the rhapsodes and actors. They're like the next set of rings.
And the audience.
They're the final ring in the chain, pulled along by the performer's energy, feeling that same magnetic force. The divine power flows right down the chain.
Wow. So it's not about the poet consciously crafting things based on rules, but more like being taken over.
That's what Socrates suggests. He says poets compose not by art, but because they are inspired and possessed, even not in the right mind.
Like religious dancers. He compares them.
Yeah, like Corybantian dancers or Bacchic followers caught up in a frenzy. Poets are light and winged and holy things, sort of out of their senses when the inspiration hits. Without it, they can't create.
They're channels, basically, vessels.
Exactly, like bees gathering honey from the muse's garden. That's another image he uses. He even points to this poet Tynnichus, apparently not very good generally, but who wrote one single amazing poem.
And Socrates says that's proof.
Proof, he argues, that it was the god speaking through him in that one moment, not Tynnichus himself possessing some consistent skill.
Okay, so God inspires the poet interprets God.
And the rhapsode. They interpret the poet. They're interpreters of interpreters, as Socrates puts it, one step removed down the chain.
So how does Socrates check if this inspiration theory fits Ion's own experience?
He asks him directly, okay, Ion, when you're up there performing those really intense bits from Homer, Odysseus, Achilles, Hecuba weeping, are you like in your right mind, or does your soul feel like it's there, living those moments?
And what does Ion say? Does he buy into the not in his right mind idea?
He absolutely confirms it. He says, yeah, when he recites something sad, his eyes fill with tears. When it's terrifying, his hair stands on end, his heart pounds. He feels it intensely.
So he is transported.
He feels he is, and Socrates points out, kind of humorously, well, crying and panicking on stage at a festival when nothing bad is actually happening to you, that does suggest you're not entirely in your right mind, strictly speaking.
Yeah, good point.
And Ion even adds that he sees the audience reacting the same way, crying, getting scared, that final ring in the chain, feeling the pull.
Right, the emotion gets transmitted.
Although Ion brings it back to earth a bit, he says he has to watch the audience's reaction because it affects his pay.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he says something like, if I make them cry, I'll laugh later when I get paid well. If I make them laugh at the wrong moments, presumably I'll be crying when I see the small payment.
So divine inspiration meets practical economics.
Pretty much. But it still shows that connection, that transmission of feeling, is central to his performance.
Okay, but Socrates doesn't just leave it at you're inspired. He goes back to challenge Ion's knowledge claims again, right?
Yeah.
About knowing all of Homer.
Yes, he circles back. Ion insists he speaks well about every part of Homer. So Socrates starts testing that with specific examples of skills described in the epics.
Like the chariot racing instructions.
Exactly. Nestor telling his son how to handle the chariot in the Iliad. Socrates asks, who's the better judge of whether Homer got those instructions right? You, Ion, or an actual charioteer?
And Ion has to admit.
The charioteer, of course.
Okay, another one.
How about the scene where Hecamede mixes a drink for a wounded soldier, listing ingredients like Pramnian wine, goat's cheese, barley? Who judges that better? Rhapsode or physician?
Gotta be the physician.
Right. Or Homer describes fishing using a lead plummet on a line. Rhapsode or fisherman?
Fisherman. It seems obvious when you put it like that.
It does, and Socrates hammers the point home. Every specific art, every technique has its own specific subject matter. Knowing about medicine is different from knowing about chariot driving.
So just because you can recite the words about fishing beautifully doesn't mean you actually know the art of fishing.
Precisely. You can't be the expert judge of something if you don't possess the relevant art or knowledge for that specific thing, even if Homer describes it perfectly.
So Socrates basically asks Ion, okay, if you don't really know about chariots or medicine or fishing, even though they're in Homer, what part of Homer do you know better than anyone else? What's the Rhapsode's unique expertise?
Right. What's your subject? Ion struggles a bit here. He tries to define it more broadly. He says the Rhapsode knows what a man and what a woman ought to say, and what slaves, free men, rulers, subjects should say.
Okay, that sounds pretty general, like knowing how people should talk and behave according to Homer.
That seems to be the idea. Claiming expertise in the sort of appropriate speech and roles within the Homeric world.
But Socrates isn't having it, is he?
Not really. He immediately comes back with more specific scenarios from Homer. Okay, does the rhapsode know better than a ship's pilot what the captain should say to his crew in a storm?
No, the pilot would know that best.
What about what a doctor should say when treating a patient?
The doctor again.
Or what a slave cowherd should say to calm down restless cattle?
The cowherd, presumably.
Or even what a woman skilled in spinning should say about working with wool?
The spinning woman, yeah. Each time, the specific expertise lies elsewhere.
Exactly. Even what someone ought to say breaks down into different areas of knowledge, none of which seem to be the specific domain of the rhapsode.
So Ion's getting backed into a corner. What's his last attempt?
His final stand is to claim the rhapsode knows what a general should say when exhorting his troops.
Ah, the art of military leadership speeches in Homer.
And then he makes a really bold claim. He says the art of the rhapsode and the art of the general are actually the same art.
Whoa. Okay, that seems like a stretch. How does Socrates handle that?
He jumps on it immediately. Oh, really? So if they're the same art, does that mean a good rhapsode must also be a good general?
And Ion says.
Ion, maybe seeing this as his best bet, says yes.
Okay, so then Socrates flicks it.
Yep. All right then, is a good general necessarily also a good rhapsode?
No, Ion can't really say yes to that, can he?
He realizes the contradiction and has to admit, no, a good general isn't automatically a good rhapsode. His argument falls apart.
And Socrates brings it home personally, doesn't he?
He does, with that classic Socratic irony. Well, Ion, since you claim to be the best rhapsode in all Greece, and you just said the best rhapsode is also the best general, shouldn't you be a general? Why are you performing poetry when Athens, for instance, is always looking for capable military leaders?
Ouch. Puts him right on the spot. What's Ion's excuse?
He tries to wriggle out of it. Says his home city, Ephesus, is ruled by Athens, so they don't need him. And Athens and Sparta have plenty of their own generals.
Pretty weak excuses.
Socrates thinks so too. He dismisses them easily, pointing out Athens has appointed foreigners as generals before when they show talent. And anyway, he reminds Ion, Ephesians were originally Athenian colonists. No excuse there.
So Ion's really run out of road.
Completely. And Socrates uses another great image here. He compares Ion to Proteus.
The shape-shifting sea god.
That's the one. Proteus would change form constantly to avoid being caught and forced to reveal the future. Socrates accuses Ion of doing the same thing, twisting and turning, changing shape from rhapsode to general just to avoid explaining what his supposed art actually consists of.
He's saying Ion is just trying to escape the argument.
Pretty much. Trying to slip away without defining his knowledge.
So this leads to the final choice Socrates presents him with.
Yes, Socrates lays it out very clearly. Look, Ion, it's one of two things. Either you do possess an art, a real knowledge of Homer, but you're being dishonest or tricky by refusing to explain it.
Which would make him unjust.
Right. Or the other option. You don't have an art or systematic knowledge, but you speak beautifully about Homer because you're divinely inspired. You're moved by this external power, maybe without fully understanding it yourself.
Art or inspiration? Dishonest expert or honest vessel?
That's the dilemma, and Ion.
Which does he choose? He must go for inspiration, surely.
He does. He jumps at it, actually. Calls the inspiration option far the nobler choice. It preserves his special status without requiring him to define an undefinable art.
So Socrates kind of lets him have that.
Seems so. The dialogue ends with Socrates saying, okay, then we'll consider you divinely inspired when you praise Homer, not someone possessing a specific art.
Wow. What a journey through that conversation. So let's pull out the big takeaways for you, listening in.
I think the absolute core is that tension Socrates creates. Art meaning systematic, teachable knowledge, techne, versus this idea of divine inspiration. Are great creative acts always products of rational skill?
Or can they come from somewhere else? Somewhere beyond rules and conscious control.
And that magnet analogy is just so sticky, isn't it? It gives you a whole different way to picture how creativity might be transmitted. Not learned, but caught. Like energy flowing down a chain.
From the muse to the poet, the performer, the audience, everyone linked.
It really challenges the idea that the performer or even the poet is the master of the knowledge they convey. Maybe they're more like conduits, channels.
Especially the rhapsode, as the interpreter of interpreters. They're passing on something that originated further up the chain.
And it connects to those older ideas, about genius being close to madness or the poet being possessed. Socrates taps right into that.
Plus, you just get a masterclass in the Socratic method. Yeah. The relentless questioning, the analogies, exposing the gaps in Ion's certainty. All wrapped up in that Socratic irony.
Definitely. Ion's confidence versus Socrates' probing questions.
So we've gone through Plato's Ion. looking at inspiration versus skill, that amazing magnet image, and the whole question of what a performer truly knows.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? Even today, when we see incredible talent, maybe someone playing music or writing or even giving a great presentation, how do we understand that? Is it all just hours and hours of practice and learned technique?
Or is there still room for that spark,
Mm.
that intuitive leap, that state of flow that feels like something else is at work?
Mm-hmm.
Can you be brilliant at channeling something specific, like Ion with Homer, without having the kind of broad, systematic knowledge Socrates calls art?
A question Plato put on the table thousands of years ago, and maybe one we're still grappling with, something to keep pondering.
Absolutely. Keep thinking, keep exploring, and we'll be back with another deep dive soon.